Today, I'd actually like to tell you a story. I tried to think up the best way to get across the type of new technology that we are developing in our group at the University of Queensland, and I thought telling an historical story was the best way. And it's a story about all of us, really. It's about the story of human development and this quest for knowledge that we all have. And I hope it's a story that excites all of you about the future. I'm a child of the 1960s, unlike some of my other speakers here today. And I still remember when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. I was only 5 years old at the time, so I didn't really understand what was going on, but I did have a really strong sense that it was something extraordinary that was happening in the world. Ever since that time, I've had a lovely dream, and that dream is that we as humans, will one day go and live in space. When I grew up in the 1970s in Brisbane, my dad had a small telescope, and we would look through that telescope on cold winter nights, and my most vivid memory of that was looking at this sort of hazy ball of striped gas that's Jupiter. That is Jupiter. Now, the image behind me was taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, so not my dad's telescope. But through my dad's telescope, I had this really strong feeling that Jupiter was really out there, that it wasn't a picture in a book. I have a video here. This is a time-lapse image taken by the Hubble Space Telescope showing how the clouds of Jupiter move, how the colours wrap in around themselves, the colours of those clouds. Also, the big red spot, it'll come back around again in a moment, that's actually a storm that's many times the size of the Earth that's been churning away since the time of Galileo. So Galileo, the scientist that first found the moons of Jupiter. And imagine having this view every day of your working life. That's what living with space would be. Well, that's my dream of what living in space would be. Okay, so let's get down to it. How do we get to space? How do humans get to space? Well, the decade of the 1960s was, a tremendous decade for space exploration. And it all came about because of a challenge that was set by President Kennedy. And this challenge, to send an astronaut to the moon and bring him back again safely before the decade was out, it really was a pivotal moment in history. Now, in response to this challenge, America and all its wealth forged ahead and created the Apollo space program. And as a technologist, the technology was some of the most elegant and beautiful that's ever been created. So these rockets, as they sat on the launch pad, they creaked and they groaned before they took off because they were full of tens of thousands of kilograms of liquid oxygen at minus 200 degrees Celsius. But once the engines lit, hot gases at about 3,000 degrees Celsius, so the other way, spewed forth, pushing the astronauts up into space and then onto the moon. And all this was done without the use of modern computers that we see today, or even iPhones, right? So this was absolutely a wonderful feat of human nature. However, the thing that is not well known about this technology is that of all of this beautiful rocket that was on the launch pad, only about 1% came back. The remainder of that rocket was all just thrown away. And that 1% is actually what I've circled there, and that's the command module which actually brought the astronauts back from space, re-entered through the Earth's atmosphere and back down to the ground. So these rockets, they were throwaway rockets. And as an engineer, this is a very disappointing fact for me. And to explain it in a simple way, imagine owning a beautiful sports car like a Porsche. And you buy it, you pick it up from the dealer, it's beautiful, lovely and new. The engine, it purrs like a cat. And then you drive it to the beach, you have a fantastic drive through the mountains or whatever, and you get there in record time. But the only problem is, once you get there, you have to throw away the keys, and you never see that ever again. What an absolute waste of beautiful technology, but resources. And that's the curse of these throwaway rockets, and this curse is actually still with us today. All right, but there is another way, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. So at the time of President Kennedy's speech, NASA was looking at lots of different ways to go to space. It was looking at rockets, of course, but it was also looking at aircraft that flew at hypersonic speed. And the most famous aircraft of the time was known as the X-15. Now, hypersonic means flying at speeds greater than Mach 5, and Mach 5 is about 5,000 kilometers per hour. So Mach 1 is 1,000 kilometers per hour. Now, the X-15 was airdropped from a larger aircraft, and it blasted off into the upper atmosphere under rocket power. It was flown by a test pilot. It travelled at speeds greater than 6,000 kilometers per hour, and it went right up to the edge of space. And also, the X-15 travelled within the atmosphere, so the friction of the air as it passed over the vehicle made the metallic skin just steam. But once it finished its flight, it wasn't thrown away, it actually came back and landed, just like any other plane. Now, 3 of these X-15s were built, and they did 199 missions. Imagine how few of those missions would have happened if they'd had to throw away the keys each time they landed. So there is another way. So you might ask, why aren't lots of hypersonic aircraft flying around today? Well, it was actually a strange twist of fate brought about by President Kennedy's impatience. So flying to space in a hypersonic aircraft, it was seen as much harder technology than Apollo-style rockets, and was never going to get the astronauts to the moon by the end of the 60s. So this hypersonic aircraft, well, it's much harder than rocket science. Right? So what we're trying to do today is much harder than rocket science. Now, after the X-15, sadly, these ideas of hypersonic flight went into the wilderness, essentially, and it wasn't until about 1990 that a real renaissance occurred. And it all occurred because of a hypersonic engine called a scramjet. Okay, so technology. I'm going to describe what a scramjet is in its true essence. And it's just the same as a jet engine. It just works at hypersonic speed. So a jet engine, you may not realize this, it actually sucks in air and it burns fuel with that air to generate thrust. It can't generate thrust without the air. It's way more efficient than a rocket. A rocket has to carry fuel and oxygen. Remember, those Apollo rockets, they were full of tens of thousands of kilograms of liquid oxygen. So a jet engine is different from that. However, because of its nature, it needs some complex rotating blades in order to enable it to work. A scramjet, however, is moving so fast that it doesn't need these rotating blades. Just the very act of traveling at hypersonic speed and ramming the air through the engine is enough to make it work. And the SC on the front of scramjet, that stands for supersonic combustion. So a scramjet is a supersonic combustion ramjet. And I actually have a scramjet here with me today. So this model I have in front of me is one that's been developed by our team at the University of Queensland. It looks much simpler than a jet engine, but as many of you know, looks can be deceiving. It's actually a model that we've tested on the ground. So we have a hypersonic wind tunnel at the University of Queensland. It's called a Stalker tube, and it's named after a pioneer of hypersonics in Australia. He's a world-recognised pioneer called Ray Stalker. And he developed this method of doing hypersonic testing on the ground. And this particular model was actually tested at Mach 12, so that's 12 times the speed of sound. And it's actually about the fastest ground-tested scramjet that's ever been done. And one day, we hope that these types of engines will help us fly to space. So, how do you design a scramjet? Like, why does it look the way it does? I'm going to try to give you a sense of what that is. After I completed my doctorate in aerospace engineering, I had the absolute privilege of working at NASA's Langley Research Center in Virginia. And my job each day was to think about new ways to design scramjets. I don't know why they chose me, but that was my job, and it was an absolutely exciting time for me. Every day going to work was really just so exciting. So I didn't need to worry about my workplace. I was just so excited about my work, I didn't mind where I was. This was the 1990s, and a lot of really smart engineers had set their mind to how a scramjet should work. But there was one group that really appealed to me, this one idea of how to design a scramjet that really appealed to me, and it's shown up here. And what this group had done is they, rather than trying to force, remember this is an air-breathing engine, so air's got to go through it. Rather than trying to force the air through it, they looked at waves in the air, shock waves in the air, and they tried to follow them. And they essentially, in essence, let nature tell them what a scramjet should look like. And, you know, they came up with these very, very beautiful engines. Now, what does, you know, a piece of technology look like when you follow nature? Well, this is actually a scramjet engine that we designed at NASA during my time. And, you know, when you really look at it, I show this to friends, and they wonder whether it's a piece of modern art or is it an engine. And it sort of is a piece of modern art, but it's all designed by nature. You know, I just listened to nature when we designed this particular engine. Now that's lovely, but these scramjet engines actually work extremely well also, and obviously that's the most important aspect of them. And we hope that scramjet engines like the one you see here and the one behind me are going to help us fly to space one day. Okay, so let's bring it back to 2016 and here in Melbourne. Now, in Australia, we are very interested in finding new ways to launch small satellites into orbit. Remote sensing, bushfire monitoring, outback internet. There are so many jobs that really small satellites can do nowadays. In fact, there are some companies out there who want to be able to launch satellites not much bigger than an iPhone, and they're called CubeSats. At the University of Queensland, we're trying to develop an Australian-based system to do just this. Here it is. It's, of course, it uses scramjets, right? And we call it Spartan. So that's the name of our system. Now, as you might know from my talk, what we've done here is we've combined a hypersonic aircraft that's powered by a scramjet with two rocket motors. So the two rocket motors are on the bottom, the scramjet is on the top. And, you know, we need those two rocket motors to get us up to speed because a scramjet only works above Mach 5. So we still need rockets to do this. But these rockets that we have as part of our system, they're not old-fashioned throwaway rockets like Apollo. these rockets, once they've done their job, they're able to separate from the scramjet, deploy some wings and a propeller, and then fly back to base and land right beside the launch stack. Now, this is an idea. It came to us from a small startup company called Heliac, and it's really our version of what SpaceX does when they land their rocket boosters on the platform in the Atlantic Ocean. So SpaceX are trying to reuse their boosters. We are as well, but we want to land ours much closer to home and then just refuel them and use them again. Okay, so once the boost is done, we get to Mach 5, we light up our scramjet, and it accelerates our vehicle, our Spartan vehicle, to the edge of space. And then the satellite is actually taken up to its final orbit by a small rocket. And then once the Spartan has finished its job, it can just turn around and fly back to base as well. So this is all about trying to use new technology to fly to space rather than just catch a rocket to space. And we really believe that this is the future of space travel for all of us. So I started my talk today with this dream of humans wanting to go to space. And we've really made a lot of progress since that challenge that was set by President Kennedy. But we still have a long way to go. And if we are going to get to space, you and I, our children, our grandchildren, we're not going to get there by throwing away 99% of the rocket. We're going to have to fly to space and find ways to do that. And of course, whether or not this happens is not just up to engineers like me, it's up to every one of us. And it's really up to every one of us whether we are going to make it to space or not. Thank you very much.